Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video, and today we're going to talk about blending and glazing with Warcolours. This comes specifically from a request. People often have asked me, I'm a big fan of Warcolours, and people have asked me about how to properly work with them because they find that they show brush strokes or they find them more difficult to work with. The reason for this is because Warcolours is a gel-based medium. So people are trying to paint with it like you would a Vallejo or a Citadel or something like that that uses a liquid medium, when in fact it's a very different paint. So what we're going to do today is we're going to show how to blend and make something that looks like that. So there's my sort of, you know, magical sword, power sword effect, whatever you want to call it, right? And we're gonna duplicate that effect on this side. What I've done here to get ready is I went ahead and just did a nice quick zenithal, lighter at one end, darker at the other, and then reversed it with the airbrush, and then ran a very thin blue glaze over just to tint the whole thing. And that is an important step when you're working with these. Undershading matters when you're working with more transparent paints. So the reason I tinted the whole thing blue first is because this is my natural midtone. And so as a result, as I thin paint and I get those other colors showing through from underneath, I want that color showing through from underneath to be the various stages of blue, and you can see there's already some contrast in there. Then finally I just edge highlighted it. That was just a quick and dirty edge highlight to get it going. I find it good to edge at the beginning and then work it. You can always go back and clean your edges up later, but it gives you a much easier surface to work with as you proceed. So right now I have some Warcolours white, turquoise 4, transparent turquoise, and black on my palette. So that's basically these 4 colors right here. Okay. Now over here you'll notice these are the ones I used earlier in the day to do the other side. I've got new ones out here because these have absorbed and sat on my wet palette long enough. They'll actually paint now more or less like normal paint, so I'm not going to teach you anything if I use these because the gel has been broken down by the water. These will now be extremely thin. They're great for glazing, but they're not going to give you the true experience out of the bottle. Okay, so let's get our guy in there. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to start with a little bit of white. You can see it's very jelly, super gelling. I'm going to dab a little bit of that off. And then what I'm going to do is just, you know, come in and get a fairly decent glop on there. Like, I'm kind of careful about it, but you can see that's pretty gloppy. Then I'm just going to wipe my brush over here. And then I'm going to grab some black. And we're going to just kind of pull that down there. Okay. Wipe that off. There, I'll actually want to do a quick rinse because black is quite strong. Then I'm going to take some of my mid turquoise and I'm going to just lay that right in the middle. You notice I'm just literally like dabbing these globs of paint on. So now what I have are 3 globs of paint. Now I'm going to wipe my brush, but that's all I'm going to do. And then what I want to do is just start pulling these together on the actual model itself. Now every so often I'm voiding my brush, which for me means I'm licking it and eating the extra paint. If you don't want to eat the paint, don't eat the paint. Just wipe it over here like this every so often, and that's fine. Just make sure you keep your brush a little wet. And you'll notice I'm kind of pulling the blue down into the darker area and white up. And then what I want to do is just keep working those colors in. Okay. And as I go, I'm just basically wet blending them together using the fact it's gel and it dries very slowly to just bring those colors together. Okay. And so I just kind of work it there. Blend them in. Nice and quick. And then we come to a point where I've kind of got this transition going. You can see where it's there. I want to let that paint rest. I'm going to go repeat the same thing on this side. Actually, before I let it rest, I want a little more white up here. You notice I'm more pushing the paint around than I am trying to get a smooth stroke like you normally would. Okay. And you can always make halfy colors, like I can get in between right now. Pull some of this white, get a nice white blue. I can work that directly in there. Then go back into my turquoise. Maybe smooth the edge of that. I can do the same thing down below. Just working these colors together. Okay. So we get a nice straightforward transition there. Now, it's rough at this point. That's okay. That's what we want. Let's do the same thing over on the other side. So down here, this is going to be the white part. So I'll get a nice dollop of white on there. Go into my black. Run that up there nice and carefully. Get my turquoise. Okay. So now I've got my 3 bands, right? Now, one of the things I can do is I can get a nice wet brush and I can just start pulling it down. Okay? And we can just work it in opposite directions. If you've ever made a color band on your wet palette, this is much the same thing. Except you're doing it on the miniature. So I'm using the wetness of it to bring it together. The nice part about working like this, at this angle, is that I can also create this sort of light illusion of how the light is hitting the sword, because I can pull all my paint in this one particular angle and use the pseudo brush strokes to my advantage. They'll be heavy at this point, but that's okay. Right? So there we go. We got a nice brush stroke. So now I want to let that side dry completely, right? So I'm going to go back to my other side. So you can see when it dries, it's actually, you know, fairly smooth. We need to smooth it out a little more. So what we're going to do is now that we've sort of wet blended this rough transition together, now is when we turn to our glazing. I'll start with a fresh paint. I could do it really easy with this that has sat here for hours on the palette. I don't think you have hours to sit there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some black, push it over here, and just work it into a nice thin glaze. I'm pushing it down into the wet palette, drawing the liquid up into it. Okay? Then I'm going, most important thing whenever you're glazing, we wick off the excess. Test on the back of our thumb, and then I'm just going to draw a little bit right down there. And then we're going to let that dry. Don't mess with it, don't touch it, unless you want to avoid your brush and just pull the end out just a little. That's all you should do to touch it, so you can smooth out that transition. Okay. Then we're going to take our white. Now white doesn't break into a glaze real easy, so I'm not going to thin it near as much. Instead, what I'm going to do is just run the white up there and get a nice smooth, strong stroke of it, right? You can see how far up that goes. Okay? Now, once again, if I want, I can touch the end there and kind of thin it just a little. But again, white breaks down so fast, so we don't want to push that too hard. Okay? So now we want to let that all rest. There's an important aspect of letting paint rest like this when you're working in these thin glazes. One of the big challenges people have when they work like this is that they touch the paint too fast and it starts to pull up. Okay? There's patience to this. That's part of the aspect. So by letting it rest, two things happen. One, it sets. It doesn't take that long. We're talking like 15, 30 seconds. But the second thing that you get is you actually see the true color. One of the challenges you have with understanding the true color in blending is if you try to do it all when it's wet, you don't get an actual true vision of what the color looks like. Because matte dry paint looks very different than glossy wet paint. It doesn't show its true color. So you want to let it dry so you really get a perception of what that looks like. So now I'm going to take my transparent color. So this is out of their transparent line. And once again, I'm going to thin this and get this flowing. Now here I'm just using water. You can use Flow 8 or something like that. Flow 8 is a great tool for Warcolours. It really does make working with them easier. But I'm going to do it here with just water because I'm pretty sure everybody has access to water. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm just going to drag it down nice and slow into the blue. I'm going to void off my brush and take the top of it and just stab it out. Alright, just very carefully smooth that out. Okay? On this side, I'm going to do the same thing I did before. So I want to build up my white a little. Just a smooth layer of it down here. I'll kind of smooth out that edge just a little. And I'm going to take my black glaze that I already prepared before. I'm going to run that up just like that. Okay. Void off my brush and just smooth out that edge. You can see how I'm just stabbing it, kind of working it back and forth. Okay, now I'm getting that nice strong transition. And then I want to let this dry, because then what I'm going to do is take that transparent, and while I'm waiting I'm going to do another coat of the transparent over here on the other side now that that previous glaze has dried. But instead of doing it all the way up here where I started last time, I'm just going to start about down here. Okay, again, I've wicked off the excess and I'm just going to run a nice very light transparent layer right down there. Then I'm going to start over the top and just kind of smooth that out. So what we get when we're working with this is by just these quick glazes at the end, we really smooth out any hint of brush strokes we've got. It gets really nice and smooth. Okay? So, now that this side is looking pretty dry, we're going to do the same thing over here. If we go too far, we can always grab a little bit of our white, and while it's still wet, we can go ahead and re-wet blend some of that in. That's no problem. One of the nice parts about this paint is that I have that longer working time, so I can play with it. As long as I don't over stress it, and you know, there's really sort of you pick it up over time as to exactly, you know, how much you can push it. But you'll get it. So then we just run that glaze back up there again. And we smooth out the end. And there we go. Just like that, we've got a nice, just like that, we've got a nice sword. Sorry, I'm working with a new angle here, so I apologize. I hope this all stays on camera and looks nice. Hopefully this gives everybody the depth perception and shows my palette at all points in time. That's what I'm trying to accomplish here. Okay. You can keep working it. Like here, I'm not quite happy. The paint's a little rough. So, you know, if I were going to keep working with this, what I would do is let everything really set and dry. Make sure it's all super locked in. I'm not going to pull up any paint. And then I would just do more or less exactly what I did more. I would reinforce my light, reinforce my dark, reglaze over the middle. Reinforce my light, reinforce my dark, reglaze over the middle. Anything worth doing once is worth doing 3 times. Okay? Because if you do that 3 full times and you really, really reinforce it, what happens is you get a nice high volume layer of what's going on there. Okay? The colors remain intense, everything is strong, but you have a nice layering of visual information that's hitting the eye. There's something to be said, like those multi-layers of paint, your conscious mind can't distinguish them, but your subconscious does. And it knows when it's taking in a higher, denser amount of visual information. And so by creating those, by repeating that multiple times, you're creating these little tiny micro differences in the volumes that the eye takes in and perceives as being richer. Okay? But really that's all there is to it. So you can see how when you're working with the Warcolours, the key with them is because they're gel based, you want to think about how you're working on the miniature more if you're working thick. Use that ability to wet blend. Okay? Drop some of your color on there and then kind of push it around. I'm doing little stippling motions to blend it out. It's going to be rough. All right? Your initial work on that is going to be rough. I want to really reinforce that. It's not a thing where you can just come in, wet blend out, and it's magical and it just bloop, it's perfect, it lays right in there, no effort necessary. You smooth it out with the glaze at the end. The other option, if you want to paint more in the traditional style but preserve the intensity, is that you have to have your undershading already established, do something like a zenithal, and then you more or less thin this only with flow aid. Like a little drop of flow aid to get this moving, and then you can paint in a more traditional fashion with it. But I wanted to show you how you can use these paints straight out in a sort of alternative way that I find really fun to paint with. Because it lets you do these big transitions. Like I'm running from white to black here, right, through blue in the middle. And doing it with relatively little challenge because of the way the gel medium let me establish the blend early on. A rough blend. It's not a perfect blend, but it's fairly smooth and has a nice transition to it. Then all it takes, as you saw, was a glaze or two to smooth it all out and bring everything in line. Okay? So, there you go. That's how you wet blend and glaze with Warcolours. So, I hope that's valuable to you. I'm going to obviously clean him up. I'll put a final edge back on his weapon. I'll do this bottom part down here, that kind of thing. But other than that, I certainly hope you found this valuable. Hopefully this answers some people's the questions that were asked around Warcolours and how exactly you paint with them and you know, avoid the sort of streakiness problem. But if you liked it, hey, give it a like. As always, subscribe for more hobby cheating in the future. If you've got anything you'd like to see in a hobby cheating video, such as this one was a request, feel free to drop that down in the comments. I'm always happy to see requests from viewers, and I try to prioritize those. If there's anything specific I can help you out with, I'm always happy to do so. Otherwise, I thank you very much for watching this one, and as always, we'll see you next time.